January 7, 1943. A hotel made in New York City entered room 3327 at the New Yorker Hotel. Inside, she found an 86-year-old man dead in his bed. Nikola Tesla, alone, in debt, forgotten by the world he had helped build. The cause of death was listed as coronary thrombosis, but the timing was anything but ordinary. World War II was at its peak, and Tesla had been telling anyone who would listen about a weapon he'd perfected. A Teleforce beam, he called it. Days before his death, he told a journalist it could melt airplane engines from 250 miles away. Hours after his body was found, representatives from the Office of Alien Property stormed his room. They declared Tesla an enemy alien, despite the fact that he was a naturalized U.S. citizen. They seized every document, every blueprint, every scrap of paper. Tesla's family was locked out. His nephews were told to go home. The papers vanished into government vaults, and the most dangerous invention in human history disappeared with them. By 1943, Nikola Tesla was a ghost of his former self. But in his prime, he was the father of alternating current, the man who lit the Chicago World's Fair, the inventor who harnessed Niagara Falls and lit up New York City. He held over 300 patents. He spoke 8 languages. He dreamed of wireless electricity and free energy for the entire planet. But by the 1940s, he was broke, living in a hotel room he couldn't afford, feeding pigeons outside his window. Yet even in obscurity, even in poverty, his mind was still working. He was designing something no one had ever imagined. A weapon so advanced that modern physicists are still trying to figure out how it would have worked. The pigeons were his only companions. The FBI was his only legacy. Tesla called it the Teleforce. It wasn't a ray in the science fiction sense. No laser beams or glowing energy bolts. It was a particle accelerator, a machine that would shoot microscopic tungsten pellets at velocities higher than any bullet ever fired. He claimed it could bring down 10,000 enemy airplanes from 250 miles away. It could stop an entire tank division. It could create an invisible wall of energy that no army could cross. Tesla called it a peace weapon, a device so terrifying, so devastating, that war would become impossible. No nation would dare attack another if this thing existed. But to his government, to the military planners who heard his claims, it looked like something else entirely. The ultimate tool for control, the ultimate weapon. During World War II, the U.S. government was desperate for a war-winning weapon. They had the Manhattan Project brewing in the desert. They had radar, they had code breakers, they had the largest military the world had ever seen. But Tesla's Teleforce was different. It didn't require rare uranium mined from Africa. It didn't require massive factories hidden in New Mexico. It was compact, efficient, devastating. And if Tesla had offered it to the Nazis, if his papers had fallen into German hands, the war would have ended differently. The government couldn't let that happen. So they took it. They classified it. They ensured that Nikola Tesla, the man who could have ended war forever, died alone and forgotten in a hotel room. His greatest work stolen before anyone could see it. After Tesla's death, the papers eventually went to a Serbian scientist named Savo Kasanovic, who later donated them to the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. But here's the mystery that has haunted researchers for decades. Many documents were missing. Pages had been removed from notebooks. Diagrams were incomplete, crucial details erased. U.S. intelligence officials had already photographed and analyzed everything before returning some of the files to the family. To this day, the full plans for the Teleforce have never been released. The official explanation? They were too dangerous. That's all they'll say. Too dangerous for the public. Too dangerous for science. Too dangerous for history. So what happened to Tesla's Teleforce? Rumors have persisted for years. Some say the technology was revived in the 1980s as part of the Strategic Defense Initiative Star Wars, Ronald Reagan's plan to shoot down Soviet missiles from space. Others claim the Russians got to the files first, reverse engineering the design for their own weapons programs. The truth? Nobody knows. The patents were never filed. The prototypes were never built. The only evidence that any of it was real is a handful of rough sketches and Tesla's own words, recorded in journals and interviews. To this day, the Teleforce remains a ghost in the machine, an invention that could have changed the course of history, locked in a vault somewhere, waiting for someone to open it. Tesla's weapon was complex, expensive, and theoretical. A billionaire's weapon. But what if a device capable of destroying civilization could be made from something as simple as water? What if it cost less than a used car? That brings us to item 2, an invention so terrifying that governments paid millions to make sure it never saw the light of day. In the 1990s, a Ukrainian scientist named Dr. Ruslan P. made a discovery that should have earned him a Nobel Prize. Instead, it made him a target. He discovered that by mixing certain common chemicals, some as simple as fertilizer and sugar, he could create a gel that, when added to water, turned it into an explosive more powerful than TNT. Not a few drops, an entire lake, a river, a reservoir. He called it the Ruslan gel. And when word leaked, the phone calls started. Not from investors, not from universities, from men in suits who didn't leave business cards, who spoke in vague threats, who asked questions that weren't really questions. Within weeks, Dr. Ruslan learned something that every inventor in this series learns eventually. Some discoveries are so dangerous that the world is never allowed to know they exist. Dr. Ruslan wasn't a mad scientist working in a basement. He was a respected chemist at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, a legitimate researcher with decades of experience. His research initially focused on industrial applications, how to safely neutralize hazardous waste, how to clean up chemical spills, how to make the world a little safer. But during one routine experiment, he noticed something strange. When he added his gel to water samples, the water became unstable. It wasn't supposed to do that. He replicated the experiment. Same result. He published a small paper in a local journal, thinking it was a curiosity, an interesting footnote. That's when the visitors arrived. Polite at first, then not so polite. Here's how the Ruslan gel worked. It altered the molecular structure of water, making it susceptible to a small electrical charge. One spark, and the water would detonate. Not just the surface, the entire body of water. Dr. Ruslan demonstrated it in his lab, a 5-gallon bucket of treated water, a small spark from a standard igniter, and the bucket disintegrated. The shockwave cracked the lab's concrete floor. The military implications were immediate. A single agent could contaminate a city's water supply, not with toxins, not with poison, but with explosive potential. Turn on a tap, and the whole building goes up. Flush a toilet, and the shockwave rips through the street. The most mundane substance on Earth becomes the most terrifying weapon ever devised. Within weeks of his paper's publication, Dr. Ruslan received visitors. Officials representing international security interests, they said. They didn't say which country. They didn't say which agency. They offered him money, a lot of money, to hand over his formula and cease all research. He refused. He believed the world had a right to know about the danger. He believed that hiding the formula wouldn't make anyone safer. Soon after, his lab was raided. His notes were confiscated. His computers were taken. He was warned that if he continued, he would be charged with threatening state security and disseminating dangerous materials. The research stopped. The scientist who had made a discovery that could have changed everything was silenced. Dr. Ruslan's work disappeared from academic journals. His name was scrubbed from databases. When journalists tried to investigate, they were told he had retired and was unavailable for comment. The formula for the Ruslan gel was classified by at least 3 different governments, the US, Russia, and Ukraine, all of whom agreed that this was one secret that could never be shared. To this day, it remains one of the most tightly guarded secrets in the world. Why? Because the gel doesn't just threaten cities. It threatens civilization itself. One terrorist with a truckload of fertilizer and a basic understanding of chemistry could hold an entire continent hostage. No water supply would be safe. No city would be secure. And the only reason that hasn't happened is because a handful of men in suits decided that you don't get to know how. Dr. Ruslan is believed to be alive, living under a different name in an undisclosed location. His family has been relocated. His research career is over. The Rustling gel exists only in classified files, locked in vaults that no journalist will ever see. But the mystery remains. How many other scientists have made similar discoveries? How many formulas are locked in government vaults right now, deemed too dangerous for the public to know? The gel is a reminder that the line between a breakthrough and a catastrophe is thinner than we think. And someone, somewhere, is drawing that line for us. Without our knowledge, without our consent, the Rustling gel could destroy cities. But what about an invention that could destroy something even bigger, the global economy? Item 3 is a device that could have ended disease, and along with it, the trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry that profits from keeping us sick. In the 1930s, a brilliant American scientist named Dr. Royal Raymond Rife claimed to have discovered something extraordinary, a machine that could destroy diseases, including cancer, using specific radio frequencies. He demonstrated it. Doctors witnessed it. Patients were cured. Then in 1939, it all stopped. Rife's lab was raided. His equipment was smashed. His research was seized. He died in 1971, bitter and broke, in a small clinic in Mexico, having spent his final years building machines for anyone who would pay him enough to eat. The official story? He was a charlatan, a con man who preyed on the desperate. The unofficial story? He threatened an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars. In that industry, with the help of the American Medical Association, made sure he would never be heard from again. Royal Raymond Rife was no quack. He was a gifted engineer and microscopist who invented some of the most powerful microscopes of his era. He was the first person in history to visually observe a live virus, long before electron microscopes became common. His universal microscope used polarized light to make viruses visible in real time, a feat that scientists at the time called impossible. And what he saw through that lens changed his life. He saw viruses and bacteria glowing under specific light frequencies, each one with its own unique signature. He also saw them die when exposed to other frequencies. The principle was simple, elegant, and revolutionary. Everything has a resonant frequency. Find the right one, and you can destroy anything. Rife built a machine he called the Rife frequency generator. It emitted low-energy radio waves at specific frequencies, nothing powerful enough to harm human tissue. He claimed that by tuning it to the mortal oscillatory rate of a pathogen, the exact frequency at which that organism would shake itself apart, he could destroy it completely without harming surrounding cells. In 1934, he put his machine to the test. A clinical trial was organized at the University of Southern California. 16 terminally ill cancer patients, all of whom had been given up on by conventional medicine, were treated with the Rife generator. Within months, 14 were completely cured. The other 2 were also cured, they just took longer. The results were documented. Witnesses signed affidavits. Photographs were taken. Then the suppression began. Shortly after the trial, Rife's troubles started. His lab was broken into. His equipment was stolen. The American Medical Association launched a coordinated campaign to discredit him, publishing articles calling him a fraud and his work a hoax. His key financial backer, Morris Fishbein, the powerful head of the AMA, withdrew support and demanded Rife hand over all his research. When Rife refused, his lab was raided by agents claiming to represent the health department. They confiscated his generators, his notes, his microscopes. They smashed what they couldn't carry. The man who had cured cancer in a controlled clinical trial watched his life's work destroyed in a single afternoon. Without his equipment, Rife couldn't replicate his work. His reputation was destroyed. He was portrayed as a fraud in every major medical journal. Doctors who had witnessed his cures were threatened with losing their licenses if they spoke out. Rife retreated to Mexico, where he continued his work in obscurity, building machines for anyone who could find him. He died in 1971, his name synonymous with pseudoscience. His frequency generator was declared a dangerous hoax. But here's the thing that never gets mentioned in the textbooks. Modern research into bioelectromagnetics suggests he might have been onto something. Today, the FDA has approved devices that use similar frequency principles for pain relief and wound healing. They work. The science is accepted. But cancer? Still off limits. Still pseudoscience. Still suppressed. Rife's original machines are gone. His notes are scattered across private collections, most of them never examined by anyone with scientific credentials. But his legacy lives on in underground circles. Thousands of hobbyists and alternative health practitioners have built their own Rife machines, claiming success with everything from Lyme disease to autoimmune disorders to cancer. Mainstream medicine dismisses it all. But the question remains, if Rife was a fraud, why did the AMA destroy his work? Why did they threaten witnesses? Why is frequency-based medicine for serious diseases still suppressed, while the same principles are approved for minor conditions? To this day, the mystery of the Rife machine haunts the fringes of science. A cure for cancer, sitting in a vault somewhere, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Rife's machine could have ended disease. It could have changed the relationship between humanity and illness forever. But what about an invention that could end something even more fundamental? The global food supply. Item 4 is even more terrifying. A technology that could make every crop on Earth useless overnight. In the early 2000s, a small British company called Zeta Laboratories made an announcement that should have revolutionized agriculture. They had developed a way to treat seeds with specific wavelengths of LED light, a process they claimed could increase crop yields by 30%, reduce water usage by half, and eliminate the need for pesticides entirely. Farmers were intrigued. Governments were interested. The media called it a miracle. Then, within months, the company was bankrupt. Its patents were purchased by a mysterious holding company with no public presence. Its research vanished from every database, and a scientist involved in the project was found dead in his home. The official cause? Heart attack. He was 38 years old and in perfect health. No autopsy was performed. No questions were asked. And a technology that could have ended hunger disappeared from history overnight. Zeta Laboratories wasn't a fly-by-night operation operating out of a garage. They were a respected research and development firm with contracts from the European Space Agency and the UK Ministry of Defense. Their lead scientist, Dr. Simon Atkins, was a Cambridge-educated biophysicist with a flawless reputation. The technology was called photosynthetic modulation. The idea was simple. By exposing seeds to specific frequencies of light before planting, you could essentially program them to grow more efficiently. The seeds would produce their own pest repellents. They would need less water. They would mature faster, produce more grain, and require no chemical intervention. It was genetic modification without the genetics. It was nature optimized. Field trials were stunning. In test plots across the English countryside, Zeta-treated wheat yielded 40% more grain than controls. It survived a drought that killed conventional crops. It resisted fungi without a single drop of chemical fungicide. The implications were enormous. If scaled globally, this technology could end hunger. It could reduce agriculture's environmental impact by half. It could make pesticides and herbicides obsolete. But that's exactly why it was dangerous. Because if farmers didn't need pesticides, companies like Monsanto and Syngenta would lose billions. If crops could survive drought, who would control the water? If food could be grown anywhere without expensive inputs, who would control the food supply? Within months of the field trial results, Zeta Laboratories was approached by investors. Dr. Atkins later told a colleague that the offers came with strings attached. Sell the patents, cease all research, hand over all data, and walk away. He refused. He believed the technology belonged to the world. Soon after, the company's funding dried up. Banks that had promised loans backed out overnight. Suppliers who had extended credit demanded cash up front. Someone was squeezing them systematically from every direction. Zeta went into administration within 6 months. The patents were auctioned off to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. No one knows who owns it. No one has ever come forward. Dr. Atkins was found dead in his home on March 12, 2004. The coroner ruled it a heart attack. No autopsy was performed. His family, deeply suspicious, requested an independent investigation. It was denied. His research notes were never recovered from his home. They had been stolen before police even arrived, someone slipping in while the family was still in shock. The Zeta technology was never heard from again. The patents are still owned by that Cayman shell company. They've never been used. They've never been licensed. They've never been mentioned in any public document. They're just sitting there, locked away, collecting dust, as if someone paid a very large sum of money to make sure they would never see the light of day. To this day, no one knows who owns the Zeta patents. The Cayman shell company has no website, no address, no public officers. The technology exists only on paper, locked in a vault somewhere, inaccessible to the farmers who need it, the scientists who could develop it, the hungry people who could benefit from it. But here's the terrifying part that should keep you awake tonight. If this technology could make food plentiful and cheap, why is it suppressed? Because cheap food means unstable markets. Abundant food means no control. The Zeta LED seed wasn't destroyed because it didn't work. It was destroyed because it worked too well, because it threatened the people who profit from scarcity. If controlling food is one way to control civilization, controlling population is another. Item 5 is about an invention that could do exactly that. A technology that could make the birth rate plummet overnight, and the people who paid to make sure it never existed. In the 1950s, a brilliant but controversial researcher named Dr. Solomon Huberman claimed to have developed a vaccine that could prevent a devastating parasitic disease affecting millions across the developing world. But during human trials, something strange happened. Women who received the vaccine stopped getting pregnant. Not temporarily, not as a side effect that wore off. Permanently. Their bodies have been altered in ways no one anticipated. Dr. Huberman was horrified. He tried to recall the vaccine to study the mechanism behind this unintended effect. But his funding was pulled. His research was confiscated, and he was forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement that forbade him from ever speaking about his work again under penalty of prosecution. The vaccine disappeared from medical records, but rumors of its true purpose never did. Dr. Solomon Huberman was no fringe scientist working in a basement. He was a respected immunologist at a major research institute, with degrees from institutions that still bear his name in their archives. His work was funded by a prominent health foundation with ties to global development. His initial goal was noble: to create a vaccine against a common parasitic infection that plagued poor nations, a disease that killed thousands of children every year. The early results were promising. The vaccine triggered a strong immune response. It seemed safe. Then the Phase 2 trials began. Within months, women of childbearing age in the trial group reported they could not conceive. Some had been trying for years to have children. Now they were being told they never would. Huberman investigated obsessively. He discovered that the vaccine contained a compound that bonded with a protein in the zona pellucida, the outer layer of the human egg. It essentially created an invisible shield that sperm could not penetrate. It was a perfect contraceptive, flawless. One shot and fertility was gone, but it was permanent. There was no known way to reverse it, no antidote, no cure. Huberman realized he had stumbled onto something massive, a biological agent that could end fertility in any population it was introduced to. If it got into the wrong hands, it could be used to sterilize entire communities, entire ethnic groups, entire nations. He reported his findings to his funders, expecting them to be as horrified as he was. That was his mistake. Within weeks, Huberman was summoned to a meeting with officials he didn't recognize. They weren't from his funding foundation. They weren't from the government. They didn't have badges or titles. They were private. They told him his research was now a matter of national security, though they wouldn't say which nation. They demanded all samples, all data, all notes. They offered him a generous retirement package and a home in a place he'd never heard of. He refused. He told them the world had a right to know. The next day, his lab was closed. His staff was reassigned. His research was gone. His name was removed from publications. It was as if he had never existed. Huberman spent the next 30 years under an NDA that he later described to a journalist as more binding than any marriage. He couldn't publish. He couldn't teach. He couldn't even discuss his discovery with his own wife. He died in 1998 bitter and broken, in a small apartment in Florida, far from the research institutes where he had once been celebrated. His research was never published. His vaccine was never developed. But here's the question that should haunt you. If the vaccine was so dangerous, why didn't they destroy it? Why did they take it? Why did they pay him to keep quiet instead of just burning the files? The answer is obvious. It didn't suppress it. They acquired it. And somewhere, in a lab funded by people we'll never know, by foundations that don't exist on paper, the Huberman vaccine is waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for the right population. Rumors persist that the Huberman technology was quietly incorporated into later contraceptive research. Some say it was the basis for non-hormonal birth control methods tested in the 2000s, methods that were later abandoned for reasons never explained. Others claim it was weaponized, a biological agent that could be introduced into a population through a common vaccine, through a water supply, through any number of delivery systems that governments have spent decades perfecting. The truth is unknown. The patents were never filed. The data was never published. Dr. Huberman's discovery exists only in the memories of those who were there and the files of those who took it. A quiet technology waiting in the dark. Some inventions threaten individuals. Others threaten entire populations. But Item 6 threatens the entire planet by controlling the weather itself. A technology so powerful that it could turn hurricanes into weapons, droughts into economic warfare, and the sky into the ultimate battlefield. In Alaska, there's a field of antennas. 180 of them, stretching across 33 acres of remote wilderness, pointed at the sky. It's called HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Officially, it's a research facility to study the ionosphere, that layer of the atmosphere where radio waves bounce and auroras dance. But conspiracy theorists have long claimed it's something else entirely. A weather weapon, a device that can trigger earthquakes, floods, and droughts. A machine that can disrupt communications, disable satellites, and even manipulate human minds. In 2014, the U.S. Air Force announced they were shutting HAARP down. The equipment was transferred to the University of Alaska. The press moved on, but the questions never stopped. What was HAARP really for? And why did the military spend $300 million building a research facility they abandoned after 20 years? HAARP was jointly managed by the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy, two branches of the military working together on a civilian research project. Construction began in 1993. Its stated purpose was to study the ionosphere. By blasting it with high-frequency radio waves, scientists could create artificial auroras and study how the atmosphere behaves. The technology was fascinating. The results were published in peer-reviewed journals. But the military's involvement made people suspicious. Why would the Navy need to create auroras? Why would the Air Force fund ionospheric research? The answer, many believe, is that HAARP was always about control. Control of communications. Control of the skies. And maybe control of the weather itself. The science behind HAARP is real. By heating a small patch of the ionosphere, you can create a lens that bends radio waves in new directions. That means you could theoretically bounce signals around the curvature of the Earth, communicating with submarines deep underwater, untouchable by enemy surveillance. You could also disrupt enemy communications, or blind their radar. Or, if you push the technology further, you could potentially alter weather patterns by influencing the jet stream. The patents for weather modification have existed since the 1970s. They're on file with the U.S. Patent Office. Anyone can look them up. The question has always been whether HAARP was the tool to make them real. In 2010, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill that included language about weather modification research and its potential military applications. The language was quietly removed before final passage, buried in committee, never discussed in public. In 2013, a Russian news agency accused the U.S. of using HAARP to create catastrophic floods in the Far East. The U.S. denied it. The Russian government later retracted the accusation. But the pattern is clear. Whenever a major disaster strikes, people look at HAARP. And when they look at HAARP, they see a weapon disguised as science, a machine that could turn the sky into a battlefield. In 2014, HAARP was supposedly decommissioned. The military handed it over to the University of Alaska. But here's the thing. The University of Alaska doesn't have a $300 million budget for ionospheric research. They can't afford to run it at full power. They can't afford the maintenance. So who does? The facility is still there. The antennas are still standing. The generators are still operational. And according to some reports, it still operates, just not for academic purposes. The suppression isn't that HAARP is gone. It's that we don't know who's controlling it now. A weapon of unimaginable power, sitting in the Alaskan wilderness, waiting for someone to turn it on. Today, HAARP is officially a research tool, operated by the University of Alaska with occasional grants from the military. But whenever a major earthquake or flood occurs, internet forums light up with speculation. Was it HAARP? Did someone turn the dial? The truth is, we don't know enough about the ionosphere to say for sure. We don't know what's possible, and that uncertainty is the perfect cover. HAARP could be a harmless science experiment, a relic of Cold War research that outlived its purpose. Or it could be the most dangerous weapon ever built, capable of reshaping the climate of entire continents. We may never know which, because the people who know aren't talking. HAARP threatens the climate. It threatens the stability of nations. But what about an invention that threatens the entire global economy by making energy free? By making oil, coal, and gas obsolete overnight? Item 7 is the one the energy companies have been trying to kill for over a century. In 1996, a small Texas-based company called T-Rex Industries announced a breakthrough that should have made headlines around the world. They had developed a device that could synthesize fuel from water and air. Not hydrogen, not electricity, liquid fuel, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, created from nothing but atmospheric carbon dioxide and water. They called it the T-Rex synthesizer. They claimed it could produce fuel for less than $2 per gallon. The oil markets barely reacted. The news was buried on page 14 of the business section. Within a year, T-Rex Industries was bankrupt. Its founder, a chemist named Dr. Walter Jenkins, was dead under circumstances that raised more questions than answers. And the synthesizer itself? It vanished from the face of the earth. Dr. Walter Jenkins was no amateur tinkering in a garage. He held a PhD in chemical engineering from MIT. He had worked for Exxon and DuPont. He knew the energy industry inside and out, its technology, its economics, its secrets. The T-Rex synthesizer was based on a simple principle. Extract carbon dioxide from the air, split water into hydrogen and oxygen using electrolysis, and combine them in a catalytic converter to create long-chain hydrocarbons. The technology already existed. Chemical companies had been doing it for decades. Jenkins just made it small, made it efficient, and made it cheap enough to compete with oil. He filed patents. He built a working prototype. And then he made the mistake of telling the wrong people. The T-Rex prototype was about the size of a shipping container. Jenkins claimed it could produce 50 barrels of fuel per day, using only electricity, water, and the air around it. The fuel was chemically identical to petroleum-based fuel. It could be used in any car, any plane, any generator without modification. The only byproduct was oxygen. Clean, breathable oxygen. If scaled, this technology could end the oil industry. It could make OPEC irrelevant overnight. It could free every nation from energy dependence, from the geopolitical stranglehold of a few oil-rich countries. It could also destroy the global economy because trillions of dollars in oil assets, oil infrastructure, and oil futures would become worthless. The technology that could save the planet could also collapse civilization. Within weeks of his announcement, Jenkins was approached by representatives from major oil companies. They didn't threaten him. They didn't need to. They offered to buy his patent. They offered him a position with a generous salary. They offered him anything he wanted as long as he stopped talking about the synthesizer. He refused. He believed the world needed this technology. He believed it was his duty to share it. Then his funding dried up. His partners withdrew. Banks canceled his loans overnight. T-Rex Industries was forced into bankruptcy within months. The prototype was seized by creditors. Jenkins was left with nothing but the patents he had filed, which were later sold at auction to a company no one had ever heard of. On June 14, 1997, Dr. Walter Jenkins was found dead in his garage. The official cause? Carbon monoxide poisoning from a running car. His family said he had no history of depression. Friends said he was optimistic about a new investor who had recently contacted him. The police called it suicide. No investigation was conducted. His body was cremated within days. His patents, which had been seized, were later sold at auction to a shell company registered in Delaware. The prototype, which had been stored in a warehouse, disappeared from inventory records. To this day, no one knows where it went. The T-Rex synthesizer is a ghost, a technology that could have changed everything, erased from existence, as if it had never been. Rumors persist that the T-Rex technology was quietly acquired by a major oil company and buried in a vault somewhere, alongside similar inventions from the past century. Others claim it was sold to the U.S. government as part of a strategic reserve of energy technology to be deployed only in the event of a global crisis that would justify upending the economy. The truth is unknown. The patents, if they exist, are hidden behind layers of corporate shells. The prototype is gone, but the principle remains. Today, companies are developing direct air capture technology to fight climate change. They're doing exactly what Jenkins did, pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. But they're not making fuel. They're burying carbon in the ground, pumping it into old oil wells, removing it from circulation. The technology exists, but it does not, because cheap, abundant fuel would destroy the very industries that are funding the research. The T-Rex synthesizer could have ended energy poverty. It could have ended oil wars. It could have ended the stranglehold of fossil fuels on the global economy. But item 8 is even more disturbing because it threatens something even more fundamental than our energy supply. It threatens our minds. In 1958, a retired U.S. Navy doctor named Patrick Flanagan claimed to have invented a device that could transmit sound directly into the human brain, without headphones, without speakers, without any external source that anyone else could hear. He called it the neurophone. The device used modulated ultrasonic waves to stimulate the auditory nerve through the skin, bypassing the ears entirely. You could hear sound that weren't there. The military was immediately interested. So was the CIA. So were people who understood the implications. If you can send sound into the brain, can you send thoughts? Can you control minds? Can you rewrite someone's reality without them ever knowing? Flanagan was awarded a patent in 1963. Then his lab was raided. His research was classified, and the neurophone disappeared from public view. Dr. Patrick Flanagan was a child prodigy. At 14, he was named one of the outstanding young scientists of America. At 18, he developed a classified device for the U.S. Navy. By his 20s, he held multiple patents in fields ranging from electronics to medicine. The neurophone was his most controversial invention. He demonstrated it on live television, transmitting audio directly into the host's skull while the host sat with his ears covered, unable to hear anything from the room around him. The host could hear Flanagan's voice clearly, as if it were coming from inside his own head. The audience was stunned. The government was concerned. The device worked exactly as claimed. And that was the problem. The neurophone worked by sending two ultrasonic beams through the skull, slightly out of phase with each other. When they interfered inside the brain, they created a modulated signal that the auditory cortex interpreted as sound. Flanagan believed the same principle could be applied to other sensory inputs. Sight, touch, smell, even thought. If you could modulate the beams to carry complex information, you might be able to implant memories, or erase them, or control them. The neurophone was a door, and behind that door was the ultimate weapon, the human mind itself. Shortly after Flanagan's television appearance, he was visited by men who didn't introduce themselves. They didn't show badges. They asked questions about his research. They asked about his funding. They asked if he had shared his findings with anyone outside the country. Soon after, his lab was burglarized. Nothing of obvious value was taken. No computers, no cash, no equipment visible from the street. Only the neurophone prototypes were missing. His research notes were left scattered on the floor, except for one notebook containing the key calibration data. They took exactly what they needed to replicate his work, but not enough to prove a crime. Professional, efficient, terrifying. Flanagan was warned to stop his research. He was told his patents would be reviewed for national security concerns. He continued anyway, building smaller, more advanced versions of the neurophone in his spare time. In the 1970s, he tried to market a consumer version, a device that could help deaf people hear by bypassing damaged ear structures. The FDA blocked it. The FCC blocked it. He was harassed, audited, and threatened. He spent decades fighting to bring his invention to the public. He never succeeded. The neurophone remains a curiosity, a footnote in the history of suppressed technology, a ghost of what might have been. Dr. Flanagan died in 2017. The neurophone lives on in underground circles, whispered about in forums and conferences. Versions of the technology are sold today as brain entrainment devices, claiming to enhance meditation, accelerate learning, or induce altered states. But the real technology, the ability to transmit complex information directly into the brain without the subject's knowledge or consent, remains classified. It's used, some say, in covert operations, in psychological warfare, in the quiet war for human consciousness that has been raging for decades without the public ever knowing. The neurophone proved it was possible. What we don't know is who's using it now, and what they're putting into our heads while we sleep. The neurophone could control minds. It could rewrite reality. But Item 9 could control the stars themselves. It's the story of a spaceship that was never built. A propulsion system that could have taken us to Mars in weeks instead of months. And the government that buried it. In 1958, a group of the world's most brilliant scientists gathered to design a spaceship. Not a rocket, not a shuttle, a spaceship powered by nuclear bombs. Project Orion was real. The idea was breathtaking in its simplicity. Drop a nuclear bomb out the back of a massive ship, detonate it, and ride the shockwave to the stars. The ship would be enormous, tens of thousands of tons, larger than any vessel ever built. It could carry hundreds of people to Mars in months, to Saturn in years, to the nearest stars in decades. It was bold. It was insane. And according to every test and calculation, it worked. But in 1965, the project was canceled. The Partial Test Ban Treaty made it illegal to detonate nuclear weapons in space. But was it the real reason? Or was something else at work, something that had nothing to do with treaties and everything to do with control? Project Orion was led by some of the greatest minds of the 20th century. Freeman Dyson, the legendary physicist who dreamed of Dyson spheres. Ted Taylor, a brilliant nuclear weapons designer. And General Thomas Power, a commander in the U.S. Air Force Strategic Air Command. They worked at General Atomics with substantial funding from the U.S. Air Force. They built and tested small-scale models using chemical explosives. The models flew. The concept was proven beyond any doubt. A full-scale ship, they calculated, could reach 10% of the speed of light. Alpha Centauri in 40 years. The entire galaxy within a human lifetime. It was the most ambitious engineering project in history. And then it was shut down. The key to Orion was the Pulse Unit, a specially designed nuclear bomb that directed most of its energy backward into a massive pusher plate with shock absorbers that would catch the blast and propel the ship forward. The engineering was brutal, but it worked. A 1963 report concluded that Orion could deliver a 1,000-ton payload to Saturn and back by 1970. By 1970, we could have walked on Titan before we walked on the moon. We could have had bases on Jupiter's moons by the Reagan administration. We could have launched interstellar probes before the internet was invented. We could have been an interstellar civilization by now. Instead, we're still arguing about going back to the moon. Why was Orion canceled? The official reason was the Partial Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which banned nuclear explosions in the atmosphere and space. But the treaty was signed after Orion was already underfunded, already starved of resources, already dying a slow death. The real reason was politics. The military wanted intercontinental ballistic missiles, not spaceships. The newly formed NASA wanted rockets, not bombs. They had their own vision, and it didn't include nuclear explosions. The scientific establishment was divided, with some physicists horrified by the idea of launching thousands of nuclear bombs into space. Orion had no powerful lobby, no constituency, no senator fighting for its survival. It was too big, too bold, too different. So it died. After Orion was canceled, its research was classified. The designs were locked away in government vaults. The scientists were told to move on to other projects, to forget what they had learned. Freeman Dyson later wrote that Orion was the only technology that could have made space exploration routine. It was killed not by physics, which was solid, but by politics, which was petty. Today, the Orion archives sit in government vaults, untouched for decades. They've never been fully released. The knowledge is there, the calculations, the designs, the solutions to problems we still struggle with. But it's hidden, buried, forgotten. A starship we could have built, waiting for someone to remember. In recent years, there's been renewed interest in nuclear propulsion. NASA has studied nuclear thermal rockets and even small nuclear reactors for spacecraft. But nothing like Orion. Nothing with the raw power to reach the stars in a human lifetime. The mystery of Orion is this. What else was in those classified files? What did Dyson and Taylor figure out that we still don't know? The project was canceled in 1965. 60 years later, we're still using chemical rockets that haven't fundamentally changed since the 1950s. We're still dreaming of Mars, as if it were the final frontier. Orion could have taken us to the stars. Instead, it took us nowhere. And somewhere, in a vault, the blueprints are gathering dust. Orion was a dream of the future, a vision of humanity spreading across the galaxy like a fire across dry grass. But Item 10 is a nightmare from the past. The most banned, most dangerous, most terrifying invention of them all. The one that could destroy civilization not in decades, but in minutes. October 28, 1943. Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The USS Eldridge, a Cannon-class destroyer escort, sat in its berth, surrounded by massive electromagnetic generators humming with power. The experiment was called Project Rainbow. The goal was straightforward. Make the ship invisible to enemy radar, give the Navy an edge in the war. They flipped the switches. The generators hummed louder. A greenish fog enveloped the ship, a thick haze that seemed to have no source. Then, in a flash of blue light that witnesses on nearby ships described as blinding, the Eldridge vanished. Not just from radar, from sight, from the very fabric of reality. When it reappeared moments later, something was deeply wrong. Some crew members were fused into the metal of the ship, their bodies embedded in the hull, their faces staring out from the steel. Others were suffering from severe mental illness, unable to speak, unable to recognize their own names. Some are never seen again. The Navy called it an accident. Witnesses called it a nightmare. And the technology that made it possible? It was banned, buried, and denied for over 80 years. The Philadelphia Experiment is dismissed as a myth by mainstream historians. But the evidence is there for anyone willing to look. Dr. Franklin Reno, a physicist working on the project, later confirmed details under oath, describing the generators, the field effects, the aftermath. Carlos Allende, a crew member on a nearby ship, wrote detailed letters describing what he saw that day, letters that were later verified by independent researchers. The Navy's own records show that the USS Eldridge was involved in experimental work in 1943, classified work that has never been fully declassified. And the technology itself, electromagnetic field generation, radar invisibility, unified field theory, was real. Albert Einstein himself was consulting for the Navy at the time. His unified field theory work was directly relevant to bending light, bending space, bending reality. The pieces fit. The question isn't whether it happened. It's how they made it happen, and what they created in the process. According to eyewitness accounts, the experiment went horribly wrong. The electromagnetic field didn't just bend light around the ship. It bent space-time itself. The Eldridge didn't just disappear from Philadelphia. It allegedly appeared in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away, for a few minutes before snapping back. When it returned, the crew was in chaos. Some men were embedded in the hull, their bodies fused with metal at the molecular level. Others were on fire, suffering from severe burns that had no external source. Some walked through solid walls, their bodies phased out of sync with normal matter. Others simply vanished, stepping through a door and never emerging on the other side. The survivors were traumatized, disoriented, and dangerous. Some attacked their rescuers. Others sat in corners, rocking back and forth, unable to speak. The Navy immediately classified the entire project at the highest levels. The crew was discharged, scattered across the country, and silenced. Those who spoke later reported being harassed, threatened, and followed by men who never identified themselves. The technology was deemed too dangerous ever to be used again. And for the most part, it wasn't. The technology behind the Philadelphia Experiment, electromagnetic field manipulation, space-time distortion, was locked away in government vaults. The generators were dismantled. The research was classified at levels that don't appear in any public document. The Navy has denied everything for decades, dismissing witnesses as crackpots and the story as urban legend. But here's the pattern that should give you pause. In the 1980s, a project called Project Montauk allegedly attempted to replicate the Philadelphia Experiment on Long Island. With similarly disastrous results, time slips, reality breaches, men lost to the void. In the 1990s, declassified patents for electromagnetic field generators began appearing in public databases, patents that describe technology eerily similar to what was used in 1943. The suppression isn't that the technology doesn't exist. It's that we're told it's impossible, while the evidence says otherwise. We're told to forget, while the documents prove it happened. What happened to the survivors of the USS Eldridge? Some died in mental institutions, their records sealed, their families told never to ask questions. Others lived in fear, changing their names, moving constantly, never staying in one place for more than a few months. The ship itself was sold to Greece in 1951 and renamed the Leon. It served in the Greek Navy for decades, its dark secret hidden from the sailors who walked its decks. The technology? It's rumored to have been the basis for modern stealth technology, the ability to make planes invisible to radar. But if that's all it was, why the horror? Why the fused bodies? Why the men who walk through walls? The Philadelphia Experiment suggests something terrifying. That when you mess with the fabric of reality, reality fights back. That some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. That the scars of breaking the universe last forever. The Philadelphia Experiment is the ultimate example of a banned invention. A technology so dangerous, so reality-breaking, that it was hidden from the world and denied for generations. But it's also the ultimate example of the pattern we've seen in all 10 items. The Teleforce that could have ended war, buried in a vault. The rustling gel that could have made water into a weapon, hidden from science. The Rife machine that could have cured cancer, smashed and forgotten. The Zeta seed that could have ended hunger, locked away by corporate interests. The Huberman vaccine that could have ended fertility, acquired and stockpiled. HAARP that could have controlled the weather, hidden behind academic smoke. The T-Rex synthesizer that could have made energy free, erased from existence. The neurophone that could have controlled minds, classified and weaponized. Or Ion that could have taken us to the stars, canceled and buried. And now, the Philadelphia Experiment, the one that broke reality itself, locked away so deep that even the people who know about it aren't sure what's real anymore. Each one, a door to a different future. Each one closed. Each one suppressed not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well. Because they threatened something. Someone. Some system we're not allowed to question. We started with Nikola Tesla's death in a hotel room and the FBI agents who stole his life's work before his body was cold. We end with a warship that vanished into thin air and a crew that was fused into the metal of their own vessel. In between, we've seen a Ukrainian scientist forced into hiding for discovering how to weaponize water. A cancer cure smashed by the medical establishment and buried under pseudoscience labels. A seed technology that could end hunger, locked away by agribusiness interests. A vaccine that could sterilize populations acquired by shadowy hands. A weather weapon disguised as academic research. A fuel synthesizer that could make oil obsolete, and an inventor found dead in his garage. A mind control device stolen by men who never gave their names. A starship that could have taken us to the stars, canceled by politics and forgotten by history. And finally, a government experiment that tore the fabric of reality, denied for 80 years while the survivors died in mental institutions. The pattern is undeniable. When an invention threatens the established order, it is banned. When it is banned, it is buried. And when it is buried, we all lose. Not because we lose the technology, but because we lose the future that technology promised. The tragedy isn't that these inventions failed. The tragedy is that they worked. They worked so well that they threatened the very foundations of our civilization. Not because they were destructive, though some were, but because they were transformative. Free energy would collapse trillion-dollar industries. Miracle cures would destroy pharmaceutical profits that depend on chronic illness. Abundant food would disrupt global trade and the power structures built on scarcity. The powers that be don't ban inventions because they're dangerous to people. They ban them because they're dangerous to them, to their profits, to their control, to their power. And in doing so, they keep us dependent, controlled, afraid of a future that might have been ours. The suppression continues today. Right now, somewhere in the world, an inventor is being silenced. A patent is being buried. A breakthrough is being locked away in a vault that doesn't exist on any map. The eraser never stops. It never rests. It never sleeps. But now you know the pattern. You know what to look for. You know the names of the dead, the technologies that disappeared, the futures that were stolen. You're no longer just a viewer. You are a witness. And witnesses have a duty to remember, a duty to question, a duty to demand the truth, even when the truth terrifies them. So we leave you with this question. Which of these 10 inventions scares you the most? Is it the weapon that could turn a city's water supply into an explosion? The vaccine that could end fertility without anyone knowing? The mind control device that could rewrite reality without your consent? Or the experiment that proved reality itself can be broken? Which one do you think is still out there, waiting to be rediscovered? Which one is being used on us right now? Comment below. I read every single one, and I'll pin the most chilling theory to the top. Next time, we investigate the scientists who died under mysterious circumstances, the ones who knew too much, the ones who were silenced, the ones who took their secrets to the grave. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay curious. The truth is out there, but it's also buried in vaults, hidden in patents, and locked in the minds of people who are afraid to speak. Our job is to find it,